Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Once there was a small, but very friendly family. It consisted of a dad, a mom, a girl, and a boy, everything as it should be. The young parents were just over 30 years old, the daughter was 5.5, and the little boy was just 1 year old. They lived in a beautiful historical city named Fisherville, which the Fiorentina family loved dearly. That was their surname. They had lived there all their lives and did not want to move. Even during times of mass migration to the warmer south, they remained loyal to good old Fisherville, and both spouses Fiorentina had their own families in this city. Eugenia's father, who raised her, lived there, and Gilberto's beloved mother and father lived there too. Eugenia and Gilberto knew each other from school. They studied together in primary school, fell in love, even started dating, but what kind of love and relationships can there be among 10-year-olds, especially at a time when there were no phones? Fortunately or unfortunately, the paths of the little lovers diverged. Gilberto's family moved to the other end of the city, changed their apartment for a house, so to save time and money on transport, they transferred their son to another school. When Eugenia first learned about this, she was very sad and melancholy. She cried for 3 whole days. But soon she got used to it, especially since the next year she lost her mother. Years passed, and the grown-up children sometimes remembered their first love, which began and formed in the 4th grade, and used it as an example in their new relationships time after time. This continued until fate decided to intertwine their souls again. Eugenia and Gilberto finished school and then, as usual, decided to enter university. However, only Eugenia managed to enter the university in the year she graduated from school. She hated her specialty almost from the very beginning, the biology teacher. The girl's parents chose the profession for her, as she herself did not know what to do. But as soon as the first year was coming to an end, Eugenia couldn't pass several difficult exams, freaked out, and withdrew her documents from the university without telling her family. Everything was revealed only when the 18-year-old girl was taking exams again. "Eugenia, have you lost your mind? You already studied for a year. Couldn't you endure 3 more?" her stepmother asked, upset by the news. Eugenia did not like the question from her unloved stepmother. After all, 3 years was too much for her, especially since she did not like the specialty. Just as she wanted to start arguing with her and defend her rights, her father joined the conversation. "Daughter, it's your choice. Thank you for at least informing us. I hope this time you'll choose a study to your liking." The father's support worked wonders, as the girl found great motivation to go into a specialty related to painting or architecture, theatrical art, or music. There weren't many such specialties in Fisherville, so the choice was small, and the girl took the general entrance exams, and the results showed that she should become an art teacher. Well, the girl was satisfied with this option. Meanwhile, Gilberto could not get into university in his graduation year due to his sister's illness. His sister Victoria fell ill with diabetes, weakening her immune system so much that she could hardly leave the house, constantly catching colds, suffering from even simple ailments severely. As their parents worked a lot to earn more money for expensive medicines and effective treatment for their daughter, Gilberto had to be at home almost all the time to take care of Victoria. He spent the entire year at home, but his sister got better, was able to return to school, and even started swimming, as she always wanted. Then the young man could finally return to his former life and start his long-awaited education. He chose what his heart was drawn to, the theatrical direction at the university. And so, the calendar flipped, showing the date, September 1st. Early in the morning, the new students arrived at the main entrance of their old university, where teachers stood with signs of specialties. One read graphic arts, another to painting, a third musical accompaniment, and a fourth theatrical arts. The young and noisy guys crowded around their signs, looking around as if they were small children on a tour in a doll or car museum. And then their eyes accidentally met. Of course, they recognized each other immediately. Thus, their second romance spun, but this time for a lifetime. Sadly, it was a short one. Gilberto and Eugenia went through fire and water together, supporting each other during hardships and problems. They graduated from university and got married that same year, becoming the Fiorentinas. A year later, they received joyful news Eugenia was carrying a child under her heart. "So, what shall we name our little one?" "You come up with a boy's name, and I'll choose one for a girl," the girl suggested to her husband. He agreed, and then for a month, the couple thought about the name. Gilberto contemplated naming his son after his father's Constantine, while Eugenia wanted to name their daughter Libra, as doctors and a fortune teller predicted the girl would be born in October. And when October finally arrived, a miracle happened. A blue-eyed, curly light-haired girl was born. A name associated with the month didn't suit her at all, and the Fiorentinas had fallen out of love with it by the time the girl appeared. Maybe Marisol? "Her eyes are the color of deep sea, and they are shining so bright as the sun," said Gilberto, pointing at the baby wrapped in a soft pink towel. That settled it. Marisol, or Mari for short, grew up to be a smart, patient, and curious girl. She easily learned and remembered poems, loved to walk and play with neighboring children on the playground. Mari gladly went to kindergarten and to drawing classes. Of course, the girl inherited her parents' artistry and passion for creativity, both of whom worked in their profession. And then, when the little girl was just 4 years old, the parents sat her on the couch, sat next to her, and told a fairy tale. "Mari, do you know the fairy tale about the watermelon?" "Let Mom and I tell it to you," Gilberto began, stretching his legs and stroking the little girl's head. "So, there once lived a daddy watermelon. He grew happily in his garden, watching other watermelons grow nearby. And then he started paying attention and saw the most beautiful mommy watermelon. The chubby one approached her and said, 'Oh, Mommy Watermelon, you are so beautiful, be my wife.'" Eugenia told this fairy tale with such enthusiasm that she even started clapping her hands and laughing. Gilberto continued. "And then the Mommy Watermelon agreed, because the Daddy Watermelon was kind, sweet, and charming. Soon after their wedding, they had a daughter Watermelon, and then 4 years later, they learned about a future little son Watermelon." Eugenia looked disapprovingly at her husband. Apparently, the story was not meant to be so short, but he decided to cut it short. Then they both stared at Mari, and she just exhaled and said, "Mom, Dad, am I going to have a little brother?" The perceptive girl understood everything. She didn't even need fairy tales, although she really liked the story with the watermelons. "How lucky we are to have such a smart girl," the father beamed. And soon, Marisol had a little brother, Rodrigo, affectionately called Rue. The Fiorentinas lived happily as a family of 4 in Fisherville, and nothing seemed to be able to disturb their happiness. But a terrible tragedy happened. The family decided to go on a summer vacation. They packed their things, loaded them into the car, and set off. They only had to drive a mere 3 hours, but fate had other plans. In the first hour after leaving the city, the pleasant and calm weather suddenly turned awful and utterly unpredictable. A horribly strong wind blew, a downpour started, followed by hail the size of eggs. The Fiorentinas were in the middle of the highway. They couldn't even pull over or find shelter. The windshield fogged up so badly that the wipers couldn't keep up. Visibility was 0. It's no surprise that the driver lost control. Gilberto Fiorentina was driving, and he couldn't stop the car in time and crashed into the one that had stalled right in front of them. Many perished in that catastrophe, and due to the raging natural disaster, there were many more accidents. The list of the deceased was long, many were seriously injured, and only a few had minor bruises. The most unfair part was that, as soon as all these collisions and cars going off the road happened, the weather changed immediately, the clouds dispersed, the sun's rays lit up the wet fields, melted the hailstones, dried the road, and somewhere, even a faint rainbow appeared. Little girl Marisol Fiorentina lay in her child's seat, which had been thrown onto the street, looking at the blue sky and the clouds scurrying across it. A cool, but already gentle wind blew on her round face, rustling her curly hair. She couldn't get up or free herself from the restraints of belts and plastic, so she just relaxed as much as possible and waited for help. Fortunately, for the little girl, everything that had happened to crumpled cars, wheels, bodies, and the bodies of her relatives was all behind her. At first, she was silent due to shock and the inability to move properly, but then she heard someone in the distance groaning and coughing heavily. Then Mari started to scream at the top of her lungs. "Help! I'm here! Mom! Help!" Someone was approaching her, shuffling along the road and coughing into their fist, until a 35-year-old red-haired woman appeared in front of the girl. She was severely wounded in the head, tears and fear frozen in her eyes. Mechanically, the woman skillfully unbuckled the belts from the child's seat. It was immediately clear that she knew exactly what she was doing. Whispering softly under her breath, "Shoo, hold on, everything will be all right," seemingly more to reassure herself than the girl. It was only then that Mari realized she couldn't move. Her legs were limp and wouldn't obey her will. The woman tried to lift Mari, but she was too weak for such a burden, especially since the girl was already quite big and heavy. On the second attempt, the rescuer couldn't hold on and fell with Marisol right into a ditch by the road, which was nearby. The ditch was quite deep, wet, and muddy. The washed-out soil immediately dirted them. The woman passed out from the fall but was breathing quietly, and no matter how much Mari tried to shout and touch her face and body, she wouldn't wake up. The little girl couldn't move her legs, so even if she wanted to, she couldn't have escaped from this trap. She lay in that cold pit, remembering what her parents had taught her. A couple of days before the trip, they had taught their daughter how to survive in the wilderness, not to approach animals, not to eat unfamiliar berries, not to drink dirty water, not to walk near cliffs, and the like. Then it dawned on her if her father had given her a lovely pink whistle, which Mari could use in case of danger. For 2 days before the trip, the girl ran around the house, whistling into it, wearing it around her neck like her most important and only piece of jewelry. Then she unzipped her jacket and pulled out her favorite thing, clutching it in her small fist. After a while, Mari started to feel sleepy. She was about to close her eyes and try to sleep, but the sound of approaching sirens changed her plans. The girl waited to hear the voices and footsteps of the rescuers, and then began to whistle with all her might. Fortunately, they heard her, and the team rushed to help her and the red-haired woman, still lying quietly unconscious. The next thing Mari remembered was being transported on a stretcher, then she smelled the scent of medicines. Doctors in nasty rubber gloves touched her, made her look at the light of a flashlight, open her mouth, answer various questions, changed her into some paper shirt, and sent her to a ward with other people. She lay under the same paper sheet, lonely and miserable, and began to cry quietly. A little later, a young nurse approached her and handed her the whistle, the last gift from her parents. Sometime later, a woman with her hair tied up in a bun, wearing a brown striped jacket, and a man in a gray vest and greenish glasses approached the girl. They had very serious, but slightly sad faces. "Do you know where my parents are?" Mari immediately asked before they could even introduce themselves. "That's exactly why we're here, dear. Marisol Fiorentina, right? We're from the Child Services. We deal with children in difficult situations." Then they told the girl that no one from her family had survived, so she could either be sent to her older relatives, grandparents, or to an orphanage. They had already contacted her relatives and told her to be patient. Mari wondered who would take her, but she never expected that all her grandparents would refuse her. Did they not love her? The girl spent another day crying in the hospital bed, not talking to anyone. And then the same man and woman from Child Services returned. "Marisol, get dressed, it's time to go." But Mari didn't know that she was not only leaving the hospital but also her hometown. She was taken to the city of Colton, located on the Colorado River. The reason given by Child Services was that there were no available spaces in the orphanages of Fisherville. Although Mari wasn't strongly opposed, as she saw no reason to live in a city with people who didn't want to take in their own granddaughter. Upon arrival at the old orphanage, the girl was placed in a room with 16 other girls of various ages. There were 4-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and even 16-year-olds. All the children gathered to see the new arrival, with boys coming from their room or the hall, looking at the unfortunate 5-year-old girl. They all understood her, as most of them had experienced similar situations. The girl was shown to her room and pointed to a bunk bed where she was to sleep. She got the lower bunk right by the window and the radiator. The children were sad and gloomy, and Marisol didn't want to interact or live with them. The driver carried in a box of the girl's belongings. They brought them from her home, mainly her clothes, a couple of toys, and a photograph of their family in a white frame. It turned out that just 2 hours earlier, a 7-year-old boy, another victim of the accident caused by the sudden downpour, had been brought to the same orphanage. Mari learned about this at dinner when the head of the orphanage and the director, Senora da Silva, stood between the two tables and made an announcement. Then it became clear that she only addressed the children in 2 cases, when the orphanage had new arrivals and when someone was being taken into a family. Kids, she raised her right hand towards the boys' table to quiet them down. Due to recent events, we have new members in our home. Marisol, stand up, dear. The girl stood up from the table, all eyes on her. And Francisco. Then a fair-haired boy with a cast on his arm and a scar near his eye stood up. But the only one he was looking at was Mari. Then the girl realized they would become best friends. 2 years had passed since then. Orphans came and went from the orphanage, some grew up and left the home, and some were lucky enough to be taken into a family. Mari and Pacho, as Francisco was affectionately called, stayed aside. They hoped to be adopted together into one family, but of course, such a thing was unlikely to happen. Parents rarely took more than one child at a time. Moreover, in Colton and the neighboring cities, few could afford it. Senora da Silva's orphanage was a warm and kind place, unlike most children's homes. Although she kept its inhabitants in strict discipline and watched over the children's behavior like a hawk, she loved them dearly and wished each of them happiness. She herself had been an orphan, lived in a very unpleasant orphanage, and therefore tried hard to alleviate the heavy burden of these unfortunate children. Of course, Mari and Pacho had other friends, Kate, who was once abandoned by her mother in a shopping center, Leonardo, whose only relative, a grandmother, died of old age, and Sancho, the eldest of the gang, lost his relatives in a car accident. Sancho was a role model and mentor for the younger ones, trying to help Senora da Silva in raising the kids. He could play the guitar. Often everyone gathered in the living room, sitting on chairs, or a sofa, or cushions, and listened and sang songs. All the children lacked something, but not Mari and Pacho. But one day, an event disrupted the idyll of the best friends. A family decided to adopt Francisco. They wanted their sick daughter to have an older brother who could help them take care of the little girl. And Pacho was just the right age, 9 years old, not too much, but not too little. Upon learning this, the boy began to refuse and argue with the housekeeper, saying he wouldn't go anywhere without Mari, and eventually locked himself in the bathroom. Marisol, dear, come to me, Senora da Silva called the girl, who was sitting in the corner of the room in tears. Mari obeyed, and the woman hugged her tightly and gently said, Dear, I understand your feelings, but help your friend. Francisco is very lucky, a wonderful family wants to take him. He will be happy with them. Don't hold him back here, help him, tell him to leave, he will only listen to you. Mari took a few minutes to digest the information, as she was faced with a serious choice to let go of her best friend and closest person or not. But eventually, she heeded the housekeeper and her words. She knocked on the bathroom door where Francisco was hiding, shouting that it was her. The boy quickly opened the door, pulled her inside, and locked it again. Pacho, you have to go. The family will give you what we all lack so much, warmth and love, attention and care, a good life, live it for both of us. After half an hour of persuasion, Mari succeeded. Francisco left but promised to write letters, and for a while, they did exchange them. Half a year passed. Mari had gotten used to life without Pacho. Mostly, she tried to spend time alone, climbing onto the orphanage roof, which she was, of course, forbidden to do, and sat there, dreaming. She remembered her deceased family, her best friend, and thought about what her life could have been if not for that disaster. At other times, Mari studied hard, participated in school science competitions when possible, and loved to play volleyball with classmates in the free section after school. Then one day, rumors spread around the house that some foreigners wanted to adopt a child specifically from their orphanage, and they specifically wanted a girl aged 7 to 10. There were not many suitable girls in the orphanage, only 3: Kate, Rita, and, of course, Marisol. Can you imagine if I get adopted and taken to someplace like England or Brazil? That would be so cool, 9-year-old Eugenia, who dreamed of it the most, said. Yeah, and you'll be Eugenia Black or Banderas, giggled the older girls, simultaneously envying these 3 chosen ones. Later it was known that the potential guardians were from France, and then all 3 wanted to be that very chosen one. In fact, all the children in the orphanage wanted to be the one chosen. That's when Mari thought that since the adoptive parents were French, she needed to learn everything about their national characteristics, culture, and art. She took all the possible encyclopedias, picture books from the school library, anything that could help her. Practically the first thing she read was the fact that the French love foreigners who know their language well, and her eyes lit up. She decided to learn French. But self-study would be very difficult for an 8-year-old schoolgirl, so she approached her English teacher after class and asked, "Senora Almanza, do you by any chance know anyone who could help me with learning French?" The curly-haired little girl's question surprised her teacher. Mari was one of the teacher's favorites because she always did her homework, listened, and behaved well in class. The woman was one of the few who believed that the girl had great potential despite being an orphan. She replied, "Yes, Marisol, I do. It's me. I studied 2 languages at the university, and French was the second one. What kind of help do you need?" From that day on, Marisol stayed after school for additional French lessons. Within a week, the little girl could almost read without mistakes. Salut, je m'appelle Marisol. Yes, excellent. You're reading the guidebook I gave you, aren't you? Senora Almanza asked during one of the lessons. The girl nodded, meaning yes, of course. In fact, she read it at night when no one could see or know what she was studying in secret. However, if the moon didn't shine through her window, her studies immediately suffered. Her knowledge grew day by day, and her motivation to improve increased at an unstoppable pace. Then one day, one of the children overheard Senora de Silva speaking on the phone in an unknown language. Can you imagine? She was speaking some fancy, incomprehensible words. What if it's an alien language? Said Mingo, who loved to make up nonsense. What were the words like? What did they sound like? Kate was curious about the situation. Something like Durapel, mole, or something like that. I don't know, she wasn't very clear, and then she walked away. When Domingo said this, Mari's book fell from her hands and crashed to the floor. She realized it was French, which meant Senora de Silva might have been talking to that family. To prevent the other kids from suspecting anything, she theatrically waved her hands and almost shouted, "Oh my God, what a bore! Impossible to read." Her ruse worked. After all, no one in her surroundings liked to read and obviously didn't know that Treasure Island was one of the most interesting books in the world. Later that same evening, Marisol decided to go to the director and find out about the adoptive parents, whether her new skill would be a plus. But passing by her office, she heard Senora de Silva's voice. The woman was clearly not speaking Russian, so Mari involuntarily pressed her ear to the door and listened. It was French. So, Mingo was right, she thought. This is what she heard. Yes, we have a capable girl named Marisol. She learns everything quickly. Senora de Silva was talking about Mari. It seemed that luck had finally smiled at her. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a phrase that made her stop. You want her to be what? A maid? But she's only 8. All the good mood and euphoria vanished from Mari at the very moment the director mentioned the word maid. Without thinking long, the second grader ran outside to catch her breath. Mari couldn't believe that the orphanage's matron would do this to her, send her to another country to serve some haughty French people, and this in the 21st century. The girl didn't know what to do. She certainly didn't want such a fate for herself, so she climbed to her secret place, the roof, and began to think long and hard. She spent so much time in her thoughts that she almost missed dinner. But Mari knew she couldn't skip it, as she would immediately be suspected. After dinner, when she cleared the table, wiped it, and went to wash the dishes, as it was her turn according to the schedule set a month in advance, she continued to think about her next steps. "You seem thoughtful today, Marisol. Is everything okay?" asked the elderly janitor Jesusa, who was in the kitchen at that moment. The girl didn't immediately realize that she was being addressed. "Yes, Aunt Jesusa, everything is fine. How about you?" Then the woman began to tell some uninteresting story about her cats, how they fought or played or bit her. Mari wasn't sure, as she hardly listened to her, returning to her problems and her thoughts. That evening, when everyone was going to bed, Senora da Silva, as usual, walked through the rooms and wished good night, although she was actually checking if all the orphans were in place. As she left the girl's room, her serious gaze lingered on Marisol. The girl stared back at her with a hurt expression on her face, which she couldn't control, and then suddenly jerked and curled up in her blanket. Waking up at about 4 in the morning, when it was still far from dawn and everyone around was sound asleep, Mari began to pack her things into her bag: clothes, family photo, toys, and a couple of books. The books weren't hers, they belonged to the orphanage, but it was unlikely anyone would notice their absence, as no one but her read anything. While dressing, she plopped onto the bed, and the mattress traitorously creaked loudly under her. The noise woke her upper bunkmate, 15-year-old Josefina. The girl fidgeted in place, then leaned down to see what was wrong with Marisol. Her sleepy eyes widened as she saw the dressed girl sitting next to her packed bag and staring at her. "Mari, what time is it?" Fina asked in a hoarse whisper. "Shoo! It's still early. Go back to sleep, or you'll wake everyone up," Mari quietly told her bunkmate, who believed her and gladly turned away. Before leaving the room where she had spent almost 3 years, Mari looked back at the girls wrapped in blankets. Memories, like film frames, flashed before her eyes, then she quietly crept past the closed boys' room, slipped into the corridors, and reached the cloakroom, where she climbed into a locker with jackets and pulled on the one she usually wore. There was a rule in the orphanage: if you outgrew old clothes, they were passed down to the younger ones, so many wore and passed on the same items over and over again. For the first time, Marisol found herself on the street at such an early hour. She didn't know it would be so unpleasant, cold, and damp. After stepping down from the porch and taking a few steps away from the house, she heard a creak from the southern side of the building. She looked in that direction and saw Senora da Silva's sleepy face in the window. The director squinted her eyes, examining the little girl, and then it dawned on her the girl was planning to run away. Her wrinkled face suddenly became animated, and she jerked to open the window, but Mari didn't hear or see what happened next, as she was already running away from the orphanage. After a while, she caught her breath and came to her senses, confronted with the question, what to do next. It was starting to get light outside, but now she needed to find some food, warm shelter, and everything else. She didn't want to quit school, so she decided to continue attending. It was Tuesday. So, after wandering the streets for a few hours looking for somewhat safe basements or entrances, the girl headed to school. And in the first math class, the school director, psychologist, and a man in his 50s, if not older, entered the classroom. The director approached the teacher, whispered something to her, and the teacher, panic-stricken, blurted out to the whole class, "Fiorentina Marisol, come here immediately with your things." The sullen girl gathered her bag under the watchful eyes of her classmates, got up, and left the classroom following the group of adults. The classroom door closed, and with it all of Mari's hopes for a life separate from the orphanage. Of course, the authorities wouldn't allow a little second grader to live on the streets, unattended, but at that moment, Mari felt very hurt and even a sour taste in her mouth appeared. Young lady, what do you think you're doing? The school director began to scold the girl. But then the school psychologist, a pleasant woman in her mid-40s with disproportionately long arms, Sonora Torrento, grabbed his shoulder. Leave this to me, okay? She said to the director, and then turned her gentle gaze to Mari. Dear, let's go to my office. We need to discuss something if you don't mind. Then Sonora Torrento put her long hand on the girl's shoulder and led her forward, but Marisol had no intention of obeying, talking, and ultimately returning to the orphanage. So she waited for the moment when the woman relaxed, and the men disappeared and wriggled out of the psychologist's grasp to escape. Marisol, Sonora Torrento managed to say. But the girl was already dashing away from her, straight to the common cloakroom for her jacket, like a mouse searching for something tasty in dry grass. Mari searched for her clothes and finally found them, starting to take them off the hook when suddenly a man's voice behind her yelled, "Hey!" She turned around and saw the director with the unknown man. Then the girl looked around and ran in the opposite direction, where one might think was a dead end. Senor Flores was initially relieved, thinking they had cornered the girl and wouldn't have a problem taking her from there. But he hadn't counted on one thing: there was a door to the storage room with a small window. Mari quickly darted in there, threw a mop on the doorknob, overturned a bucket, placed it on a box, pushed her bag and jacket through the window, and began to climb out herself. The director couldn't open the door, so he banged and shouted, "Fiorentina, what are you doing? Open up, we'll get you out anyway, you can't escape." He was angry because all these cat-and-mouse games were new to him. Even the teenage boys didn't behave like this when they ran out of the toilets if they were caught with cigarettes or other school-prohibited items. The noise attracted other people: a security guard, the deputy principal, and a janitor. They found out what was happening, and then the janitor exclaimed and turned to the director. "Senor Flores, there's a window in this room. She must have already jumped out." After her comment, the director paused for a moment, then put all his weight on the door handle. The door opened. But even the soles of Mari's disappearing feet were no longer visible. "And you," the director, let a little second grader escape. "How am I supposed to go back to work without the child? Who will be responsible for this?" The silver-haired man suddenly became angry. Apparently, he was from Child Services. He threw up his hands, pushed through the onlookers, and left the cloakroom. At that moment, Mari had already moved far enough away from the school. She felt hungry, so she took out a notebook, a book, and a blue pencil from her bag. She wrote for food on the paper, then set the book up as a stand, and made herself a seat out of cardboard boxes from the nearby dumpster. Cardboard, her bag, and on top of the bag, little Mari herself. She took off her hat to collect money and placed it next to the sign. The sight was heartbreaking: a little girl in a dirty jacket with tousled hair and furrowed brows, all huddled up on her bag, shivering. People passing by clutched their hearts, gasped and moaned, lamenting. Why is a child alone on the street? Where are the authorities? Children are begging. And similar phrases flew past Mari. She didn't respond, just sat quietly, hugging her knees, waiting for someone to throw in some money. Occasionally, someone did, small change of 1 or 5 pennies, sometimes even a €1 note, and by the end of the day, Mari had collected a total of €12. A woman brought her some food in the evening, a couple of sausages and a poppy seed bun. For her, it was an achievement. But as good and popular as this place was, she couldn't stay there. Someone among the passers-by might have called Child Services. So she went to a tiny 24-hour corner shop, bought another bun and some water, and started looking for a suitable place to spend the night. As darkness fell, suspicious people began to appear on the streets, so she urgently needed to find a hiding place. In an old entranceway, Mari found a small basement with a wooden door. There was an old dusty chair, a child's bicycle, a few boxes, and an artificial Christmas tree. Apparently, one of the residents had turned this place into a personal storage room. Oddly enough, it wasn't even locked. Mari, like a little street cat, ate part of her provisions and settled in the chair, but she slept longer than planned. Waking up almost at noon, swallowing the rest of her bun and washing it down with water, Mari stretched her limbs, which had become numb from her curled-up position, and didn't hear someone coming down to the basement. She realized only when the wooden door swung open and a young woman screamed in surprise and stepped back. Mari was frightened too, but remained silent, clutching her belongings tightly. She prepared for another escape, but the young woman blocked her way. After catching her breath and realizing that it was just a little girl in front of her, she calmed down and said, "Hi. What are you doing here? Did you sleep here?" The woman had a gentle voice. Her dark eyes seemed kind and concerned, so Mari decided to trust her and nodded. The girl pursed her lips and then added, "Come with me. I'll make you some tea and serve some porridge. It's just ready." Within minutes, Mari was sitting in the young woman's small, cozy kitchen, holding a cup of hot water, looking at the jar with instant coffee. She felt warm and calm. The last time she had felt this good was when she sat with her own parents at home. Her father would sip coffee, glancing at the clock so as not to be late for work, while her mother would cut sandwiches for her daughter and hold her belly, where her little brother was then growing. "I'm Natalie." "What's your name?" asked the apartment's owner. "Helena," Mari lied. Soon, Mari had eaten her fill of porridge, drunk her coffee, and asked to use the toilet. When she came out, she heard Natalie calling someone on the phone, whispering, "So, what should I do? I don't want her to get into trouble." "Okay, I'll call the police," Natalie sighed. Marisol quietly put on her shoes, grabbed her bag, jacket, and was about to open the door, which was too noisy and attracted a lot of attention. Of course, Natalie immediately ran to the exit and shouted, "Wait, I'll help you." But the girl had already dashed onto the staircase and flitted down it so fast that Natalie didn't even try to catch her. And so, Mari was alone on the street again, without any options for where she could spend the next night. And she had to start begging again to have something to eat for dinner, with only €6 left in her pocket. She sat on a bench, catching her breath and thinking about where to go next. Then, like an arrow shot by Robin Hood himself, an idea struck her mind. She needed to find Pacho's house. They had exchanged letters, which she had taken with her, of course. Rummaging through her bag and pulling them out, she read the address, St. Nicholas Street, house 15 or 16, it was unclear, as the young boy's handwriting was SOSO. But that was a minor detail. The problem was, Mari didn't know the city at all. She had only been to 3 places, the orphanage area, near the school, and a sports center where the orphans were taken a couple of times for free sports lessons. St. Nicholas Street was definitely not nearby any of these places. Her only option was to ask passers-by. But while Mari approached people who were in a hurry and quickly responded that they didn't know, she saw something like a city map at one of the bus stops. Approaching it, she realized that all the streets were labeled and even the public transport routes that could help her get there were indicated. Elated, Marisol waited for the right trolley bus and, along with a few people, boarded the old, noisy vehicle. The conductor, a woman in her 50s, approached each of the new passengers, a man in a black hat with a bag, a woman with fiery red hair, and a boy about 15 years old. They, of course, paid the fare, and then the conductor reached the little Marisol, who tucked away in a corner of the trolley bus, trying to appear invisible. "Ahem, please pay the fare," the conductor cleared her throat and said. Mari initially didn't respond, pretending not to hear, but her ears, burning red, gave her away. The entire trolleybus watched this scene, waiting for the epic resolution. The conductor repeated her request and approached the little girl even closer. "Sonora, I don't have anything," Mari said in the most pitiful voice she could muster. Her sad child's eyes looked up at the woman, who had never known what to do with fare dodgers. She had thrown out drunken men refusing to pay, saving their coins for another bottle of liquor, but with children and teenagers, it was different. She usually softly persuaded them to get off at the next stop to avoid trouble, warning them about future inspections and the possibility of their parents being fined. But with Mari, she decided to do the same, albeit less forcefully. My parents are dead, Mari blurted out rather sharply and loudly when the conductor mentioned them. Many passengers heard this. Elderly women clutched their hearts or covered their mouths with a hand, forming a house shape with their eyebrows. One man immediately began rummaging in his pockets to pay for the little girl, but the conductor signaled to him that it wasn't necessary. Pretending that the girl had paid herself, she sat down and started looking out the window thoughtfully. The trolleybus returned to its usual silence and detachment, as is common in public transport. After almost half an hour, Mari got off at the right stop, glancing gratefully at the conductor before leaving. The woman blinked meaningfully, saying nothing, but it wasn't needed. The new district of Colton was interesting and quite unusual for the girl. Most of the buildings were new, and there were few trees or any vegetation on the street. The runaway approached the map at the bus stop and began to examine it, where she was and where St. Nicholas Street was. It wasn't far at all, she just needed to walk along the park, turn onto Central Street, walk a bit, and reach her destination. So Mari did, but while there, she became very thirsty. She sat on a bench and counted her remaining money. She had enough for water and even a bun. She was about to look for the nearest shop, but saw a water dispenser in the middle of the park. There, for just 5 pennies, she could press some buttons and get a cup of fresh water. Near it stood a man with a boy about 5 years old. Approaching closer, Mari could hear their conversation. "Tim, come on, hello, we've already taken water here 300 times. You press here, choose a cup, then press the water button, and put the cup here." The father was initially nervous, but when his son said he just forgot, the adult immediately softened. "All right, go ahead then, let's not hold up the line, we have people waiting here." But seeing this scene made Mari feel melancholy. She thought, if she hadn't left the orphanage, she might have been taught by close people how to use a water dispenser. Then she snapped back to reality, remembering the director's setup and the French wanting to make her a maid. After drinking water and regaining her strength, Mari continued her journey, and within 15 minutes she reached St. Nicholas Street, lined with attractive 1- or 2-story houses. The first house she saw was number 45. This meant she had to go further to find the desired 15th or 16th house. This area was clearly affluent, well-kept lawns, clean yards, lavishly decorated houses with tall fences. The entire view reminded her of some architecture or design magazine picture she once saw in a store. The numbers decreased: 40, 32, 25, 19, 17, and when she approached number 16, she heard piercing children's laughter. Instinctively, she hid behind bushes of some bright green, leafy plant. Peering out from the undergrowth, Mari first saw a beautiful dog, a golden retriever, frolicking on the lawn, waiting for someone else to come out of the gated part of the yard, barking and wagging its tail. A boy finally emerged. Mari recognized him immediately. Of course, it was her best friend Pacho. She had found him. Just as she was about to come out of hiding, she saw someone else with Pacho. Remembering her friend's letters, she realized it was his new sister Alicia. Alicia had a congenital defect, an underdeveloped right leg, which meant she had to wear a special prosthesis and often use crutches or even a wheelchair. Pacho's adoptive parents wanted to adopt a child who could help her more in an emotional sense than physical. They wanted them to be friends, play, and grow together, as advised by psychologists and doctors. They never regretted their decision, as Pacho was the perfect choice: kind, caring, honest, loving, and responsible. Of course, Marisol understood this, so she decided to watch her friend. He was running on the grass with the dog, laughing, helping the girl walk with them, and the 5-year-old was very happy, smiling broadly, laughing loudly, trying to frolic with her brother and the dog, but suddenly fell. Alicia cried out and fell on the grass. Instead of picking her up and comforting her, Pacho simply lay down next to her. He stretched out his hand with his index finger pointing up. Mari immediately understood he was showing Alicia the clouds, because they used to do the same together when they lived in the orphanage. "See that small cloud? It looks like a duck," Pacho would say. "I think it looks more like a potato," Mari would respond. And the children would argue until they came to a consensus: a potato duck, an airplane bird, a floral donut, and other things. Despite seeing her best friend playing with his new sister, Mari thought about how she couldn't take him away. The little girl needed Pacho, but not as much as the sick little one did. Sighing heavily, Marisol abruptly turned to leave the house secretly and stealthily, but almost bumped into a man standing right behind her. "Oh, hello. Do you want to play with my children?" Mari recognized the man. He was Pacho's adoptive father. He and his wife had come to the orphanage to adopt him. But fortunately for her, the man didn't recognize Mari. "No, sorry, I'm leaving," she mumbled and ran away from where she had come so long and persistently. Turning back only once, she saw Alicia and Pacho hugging their father on their cozy home's territory. It seemed to Mari that Pacho looked after her, but she definitely wouldn't have stopped. A couple of hours later, Marisol sat on a boulevard, again begging for alms. There was a fair number of passers-by, but few were giving any money. This was problematic, as the girl craved something hot to eat. She felt increasingly upset about her situation, missing Pacho, her deceased family, even the orphanage. Mari wished those French people had never crossed her path. She would rather have stayed familyless, lived in the orphanage until 18, then worked or studied while living in a hostel or sharing a rental. That's how she envisioned her favorable future, having lost hope that anyone kind and pleasant like Pacho's adoptive parents would ever adopt her. Overwhelmed by these oppressive thoughts, Marisol began to get angry. And then, unexpectedly, her anger poured out in a stream of words, but in French. "Please, give something for a poor abandoned orphan's sustenance," she said, stretching out her hat to people. And this worked better than just sitting silently with a sad note. More money started coming in, even if the number of perplexed faces increased. Of course, French wasn't a common language in this country, especially not in Colton. Only children from affluent families, the so-called elite, learned it in one particular gymnasium, and into this elite, a poorly dressed orphan begging in an old hat could not possibly fit. For about 40 minutes, Mari showcased her skills and knowledge until she completely ran out of energy. She hadn't eaten for a long time, had been walking and riding around the cold city. Her throat was dry with a painful and bitter sensation, so she began packing up to go to a store for some coffee, where they pour boiling water for free. Just as she packed her things and looked up, she saw a well-dressed man with a square leather briefcase slowly walking past her. Mari decided to say something in French as a last resort, hoping he might notice her and give more money. She chose to recite a popular children's poem she had liked and memorized. Her plan worked, as the man stopped, turned, and approached the little girl. "You know French, young lady?" Quite a rarity these days, he complimented her, but didn't take out any money. To which Mari responded, "Oui," and smiled faintly. She was pleased to receive a compliment, but €1 would have been much more useful in her situation. Before Mari could move, the man continued talking to her. "What is such a talented girl doing on the street? Can I help you with something?" It was strange that an adult man with gray hair and wrinkles was addressing a second grader so formally. If it weren't for his serious face, one might think it was all a big joke. But this well-dressed man was 100% sincere. However, Mari didn't want to get involved with anyone, as she had already trusted a couple of people in the past 2 days who had immediately betrayed her. The girl shook her head and began to walk away from the polite passerby towards the stores. "Wait, young lady. Let me feed you at a cafe. There's a nice little place just around the corner. They have croissants with chocolate and delicious coffee. It's all on me." This offer enticed Marisol, so she agreed to go with him, but only for the food. The cafe was indeed very cozy and charming. This was only the second cafe she had ever been to. The first time, her parents had taken her in Fisherville, where she ate potatoes and drank juice. And now, she was having the most delicious croissant of her life, something she had only read about in books and French textbooks. The man just ordered a cup of coffee for himself. As Marisol eagerly devoured the croissant, she began to relax, and the man seized the moment to start a conversation. "My name is Philippe. And yours?" He remained as polite and pleasant as before, his questions not sounding intrusive. Marisol, but better call me Mari, the girl replied, surprised at herself for so easily and quickly revealing her real name to a stranger. Then he carefully extracted the rest of her personal information, why she was on the street, where she ran away from, where she was born, how she learned French, and so on. Marisol found it so easy to tell this man everything about herself, feeling his sincerity and simplicity. He didn't blame her, wasn't worried about her, didn't try to call the police or child services. Philippe simply listened to the girl, absorbing every word she said. After all the questions were asked, Philippe teared up. He pulled a handkerchief from the breast pocket of his jacket and wiped the tears from his eyes and cheeks, then he sighed deeply and said, "My wife and son died in the same car accident where you were, Marisol." His voice suddenly trembled, but he didn't try to hide it, as he apparently developed trust in the girl. "Did you see them there?" Her name was Irene, and the son's name was Adriano. Irene had bright red hair and green eyes. Suddenly, memories of that terrible time returned to Mari's mind. The red-haired woman who had freed her from the child's car seat, trying to calm her down. Did she have a heart-shaped mole on her left temple? This question shocked Philippe. His face instantly became so sad and old that the girl realized her rescuer had been the wife of her new friend. They sat in silence for another 10 minutes, contemplating what they had just learned. Both had suffered irreparable losses in their lives. After the silence, Philippe was the first to speak. "Mari, dear, you can't live on the street, it's dangerous. You are very talented, you deserve a better life." Then Philippe sighed deeply, looked into the girl's eyes, and added, "Can I adopt you?" Mari choked on her coffee when she heard this. Mixed emotions overwhelmed her heart and mind. She had given up hope of ever hearing something like this. Now she understood what the children who were taken from the orphanage meant. Now she realized the joy of being chosen by someone else. "Yes," she stammered, her smile so wide and long it stretched from ear to ear. She got up from the table and approached Philippe to hug him around the neck. He allowed her to do so. But the man insisted that they still call the police, who would return her to the orphanage for a while, and then Philippe would take her. He swore to do all this, not to leave the girl alone, and to come back for her. Fortunately, he kept his promise. One of the arriving policemen greeted Mari's adoptive father very politely. Soon after the adoption, Mari learned that Philippe was a diplomat, quite respected in the city and region. Upon arriving at the orphanage, Marisol apologized to the director for her escape and the inconvenience caused, and upon her soon departure, she thanked the woman for her kindness and for raising generations. In fact, Mari didn't stay in the orphanage for more than a week. It's good to have an adoptive father who is a diplomat. Philippe lived in a 2-room apartment. The small room was empty, with white walls. "Your bed will be delivered in 2 hours, and tomorrow the rest of the furniture, a wardrobe, a desk with a chair, and a nightstand, the rest we'll choose together depending on the mood." "Okay?" Philippe said, showing the girl her new home. "So, I picked up a few cans of paint in different shades at the store. How do you see your room?" On the floor stood 5 cans of soft shaded paint, pink, green, yellow, blue, and lavender. All of them were very beautiful and Marisol liked them, so she said, "How about one wall being yellow, another blue, the third pink, and the last one this, lavender?" Philippe laughed, and they began to work. Mari had to transfer to another school, as the old one was too far, but before leaving, she asked Philippe to help her French teacher, as she had taught her completely free of charge. Of course, the father agreed and gifted the young teacher a trip to Paris for a few days, which made her immensely happy. Marisol continued to study French on her own. In a new school, the kids were nice, the teachers competent, there were many different sections, and the building looked very decent. Life got on track, her studies continued, and a family appeared. What else could she wish for? But something was still missing in her. Years passed. Mari turned 16, grew up to be an attractive and smart girl, made friends, but luck wasn't on her side in love. It's not that she was looking for a groom at such a young age, but her teenage years were crawling, and she needed something to fill them. Then one day, her father sent her to the capital for a couple of weeks of study and cultural rest. There was a very interesting program like a camp where they sent young talents, monitored them, and simultaneously taught financial literacy, economics, programming, and the like. When Mari arrived in capital and the whole group finally gathered together, they did a roll call. A woman in a red neckerchief shouted the surnames and names of the children at almost the entire station, and they answered, "Here. Abdella Samira. Delgado Alejandro. Gomez Montero Margarita. Hidalgo Violeta. Madariaga Mateo. Torres Maria. Trivino Francisco." Mari was looking at everyone who responded to their name. And on the last person, she stopped. Only after a minute of stunned silence, skipping her name in the roll call, did it dawn on her that this Francisco, standing 2 meters from her, was her Pacho. "Hey, you are Fiorentina Marisol?" "Yes?" "Answer me." The shouting woman was shaking Mari, who seemed lost. She told her, yes, she is Marisol. At that moment, Pacho looked at her, hearing the familiar name, opened his arms wide and hugged her tightly. He was so handsome and happy. They spent all this time together, discussed their lives over the past years, exchanged news, got to know each other again, and soon realized that they loved each other and that the separation had been hard. On the last day of the trip, they promised not to part anymore and kept their word. In Colton, they continued to meet, got to know each other's parents and families. And one day, the young couple in love was lying on the lawn, looking at the clouds. "It looks like a heart," Pacho said, pointing his finger at the sky. "You know, Pacho, I agree with you this time," Mari replied, as their fingers intertwined. Thank you for listening to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like. It really motivates us. All the best.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.